Namaste. Good morning. Dear Professor Sangeetha Menon, today's distinguished speaker, Dr. Gitesh Nirban, co-convener of the webinar, distinguished invitees, dear friends interested in Mahābhārata scholarship. I welcome you all to the 31st session of this series of webinars on Mahābhārata as hosted by Department of Philosophy, University of Delhi and Kamala Nehru College, University of Delhi. These webinars are being organized under the aegis of SPARK project, which is a scheme for promoting academic and research collaboration, an initiative of Ministry of Education, Government of India. The title of the project is Yoga Consciousness in Mahābhārata and Bhagavadgītā, an ethical value for societal and political well-being. We are working as a team for this project along with Professor Vishwa Adluri of Hunter College, City University of New York, USA, Dr. Joydeep Bagchi from Germany, who is presently associated with Hindu University of America, USA, and Dr. Gitesh Nirban, who is hosting this program now from Kamala Nehru College, University of Delhi, and me, Professor Bala, head of the Department of Philosophy at University of Delhi, as one of the principal investigators. Our extended team consists of Ms. Jayshree Jha, Ms. Anmol Preet Kaur, Ms. Megha Kapoor, who are PhD research scholars at the Department of Philosophy. And we also have another young member, Deepshika, who is doing masters, who is into Mahābhārata scholarship. As far as our project is concerned, it is our collaborative attempt to revisit the Indian epic to explore yoga consciousness as one of its underlying messages, while understanding how dharma is a result of yoga consciousness in Mahābhārata can well be interpreted for political and societal well-being. This project is a journey through the roadmap of yoga consciousness to delve deeper into ancient Indian wisdom for reviving the concepts of social responsibility and value embeddedness. It is also a search for answers to the question of what is the right course of action, thus portraying how yoga consciousness in the form of equanimity and equality in Mahābhārata emerges as an ethical ideal. So we have certain pointers that we have picked up for this project. One is yoga consciousness in Mahābhārata and Bhagavad-gītā. The other one is the ethical values of societal well-being and political well-being. Along with these, we would be focusing on what is the right course of action and how to identify this right course of action. After identifying the right course of action, how to perform right course of action. These are very important steps, both epistemologically and ethically. These are very important pointers that we will be dealing with in this project. These series of webinars are our humble attempt to make the various aspects of Mahābhārata reach the diverse audience who hold interest in the study of the epic. We started this series of webinars during the extreme phase of lockdown to engage the minds with Mahābhārata. We have had the privilege of hosting scholars of repute from universities and organizations in India and abroad, wherein diverse topics related to Mahābhārata and Bhagavad-gītā have been touched, ranging from social and political well-being, ethical dilemmas, justice, environmental influences, dialogical consciousness, all as an attempt to explore Mahābhārata for the human well-being. We are very honored today to have with us Professor Sangeetha Menon, head of Consciousness Studies program at NIAS, National Institute of Advanced Study, Bangalore. She will be speaking to us on Arjuna's conflict, Duryodhana's pain, Krishna's smile. No, this is a very interesting trajectory that she has chosen to talk to us. And within the context of how Mahābhārata or Bhagavad-gītā contextualize layered psychological states within the transformative philosophy of enlightenment. So this is, I'm very sure this is going to be a very interesting talk. And thank you so much, Professor Sangeetha, for accepting our invitation. And we really feel honored to host this talk of yours. And it's definitely going to add a different kind of dimension to the Mahābhārata studies that we have been grappling with. So thank you so much for joining us. I request Dr. Geetesh to take things further and introduce the speaker formally. Thank you. Over to you, Dr. Geetesh. Please unmute.
Jai Shri. Thank you, Professor Bala. Namaskar to all. We are very honored to have amongst us, as Professor Bala just mentioned, Professor Sangeetha Menon, who is a philosopher, psychologist. Her educational background is in biology, philosophy, and psychology. A gold medalist and first rank holder for postgraduate studies, she received National University grants, commissions, fellowship for her doctoral studies for 5 years. She's a professor at the National Institute of Advanced Studies in the campus of Indian Institute of Science and joined NIAS in 1996 with particular interest in consciousness studies. She heads the consciousness studies program at NIAS. Dr. Menon has been working in the area of consciousness studies for over 20 years now. She has given numerous lectures and presentations in India and also in United States, Europe, and Australia on wide-ranging issues relating to consciousness, mind, science, spirituality, interface issues. Her publications cover areas that concern consciousness studies, brain studies, altruism, aesthetics, Indian psychology, and science, spirituality, art dialogues. The Journal of Transpersonal Psychology in 2002 and the Association for Transpersonal Psychology in 2013 have published reports on her research work and contributions to theories of self-transformation. She has several publications in peer-reviewed journals and has contributed chapters on a variety of issues relating to science and religion, self, mind, and consciousness. Her chapter on Hinduism and science that appeared in the Oxford Handbook of Religion and Science, 2006 OUP, it gives a fresh outlook on this issue. She has also authored few monographs on consciousness in the context of Indian thought. Her books published by Springer are Brain, Self, and Consciousness, Explaining the Conspiracy of Experience, and the edited volume, Interdisciplinary Perspectives on Consciousness and the Self. Her other books include The Beyond Experience, Consciousness and Bhagavadgītā, Consciousness, Experience and Ways of Knowing, Perspectives from Science, Philosophy, and the Arts. Her another book is Science and Beyond Cosmology, Consciousness and Technology in Indic Traditions. Next is Consciousness and Genetics, then Scientific and Philosophical Studies on Consciousness, and Dialogues, that is Philosophers Meet the Seers, with a long, wide variety of work that she has done. We need to even know that apart from being a very serious academic, a scholar of a repute, Professor Menon writes poetry, fiction, and is an avid photographer, artist, and web designer. And I have to add this to let the audience know that she spends time for even charity activities. What a multifaceted personality you are, Professor Menon, and we're really honored to have you amongst us today. We welcome you on behalf of the Spark project team. And today, Professor Menon, as Professor Bala just mentioned, would be delivering an address on a very thickly worded topic of her address, that is Arjuna's conflict, Duryodhana's pain, and Krishna's smile. Well, you have incorporated quite a lot of elements, and she's going to be analyzing how Bhagavad-Gītā and Mahābhārata contextualizes layered psychological states within a transformative philosophy of enlightenment. Thank you, Professor Menon, for being with us today. I now hand it over to you to take the proceedings further.
Namaste, and thank you so much, Dr. Geetesh Nirban, for that very kind and generous introduction, and also your invite to speak at this forum. I thank Professor Balaganapati, whom I have known for some time now, though we have not been in touch. So thank you, sir, for inviting me. Thanks also to Dr. Saurabh Turaria for encouraging me and saying, yes, you should give this talk. And I also see other friends here, Regina Bangalore, and of course, Professor Aaron Tuganda from Berlin. So it's amazing to be here with all of you this morning. And in case you wish to show your videos, you can, because what we are going to talk about is Mahābhārata, people with faces. So, it will be good to see a few faces while we discuss those people. So please feel free if you wish to show your videos. I mean, to me, I prefer that, but if you have a personal difficulty with that, I do understand. But otherwise, let us see each other and see what we can discuss perhaps in the next 45 minutes or so. So once again, a big thank you to all of you, to all the organizers for inviting me in this series of lectures. And I look forward to listening to the other lectures as well. As I said, I see that Professor Arjuna has given a lecture. I look forward to listening to his lecture, which is already there. Well, yes, as you rightly said, Dr. Geetesh, this topic is complex because the text is complex. The people therein are complex. And what they go through in their life is very complex. And let me begin with perhaps the perspective Airavati Karve takes, one of the greatest interpreters of Mahābhārata in Uganda. According to her, Mahābhārata is not a nice romantic story which ends with, okay, thereafter everybody lived well, happily, singing their songs. No. According to her, Mahābhārata is a pointer to tell us that we all are contributors in what is happening. In a sense, we are all perpetrators of certain sense of violence or certain sense of intrusion of different kind. And the idea of the Mahābhārata is to analyze or to show us what goes through each mind. And there is no blame, there is no gain. In fact, though the text talks about a lot of blame and gain, in one perspective, the text is not blaming or using a game to tell us anything. Perhaps, according to Airavati Karve and interpreters like her, the goal of Mahābhārata is to give us a view about different layers of mind and the complexities of the human mind that perhaps not very much amenable to us even to understand or critique or even investigate. So what I plan to do in a very humble manner is not to say this is what our Mahābhārata does. No, I wish to say this is what I see in Mahābhārata. Because again, according to Airavati Karve, Mahābhārata is a story retold time and time again. It's a song which is told again and again, sung again and again. Because every time you look at Mahābhārata, you see a different perspective, a different vantage point. So how many vantage points does Mahābhārata have? We don't know. It all depends upon the permutation and combination of experiences, incidents, people, their personalities coming together, and their life situations and challenges, and their helplessness. So in my talk, at least in the beginning part, you're going to hear a few words which may not be very conducive to what you call as, or I call as enlightenment, because enlightenment is all about up above, right? No. So in the beginning part, at least, I'm going to talk about what is down below, the pains and perils and real grief which people go through. And why do they go through this? We don't know. And however times perhaps you read Mahābhārata, you really don't know what is the reason of the pain which people go through. And this is also, I think, a universally relevant idea that instead of looking at one reason of human pain or human suffering, to understand human suffering itself as a predicament with which life is born or life is spent. And so Mahābhārata, though being a text which is written many, many years, I think it's very, it's a very contemporaneous text in the sense that it doesn't try to romanticize, it doesn't try to round up things. Rather, there are more and more rugged ends as we go through the text. And that is the beauty of it, because in those rugged ends, we see a lot of analysis, a lot of presentation. And in a sense, the analysis and presentations of human mind is the greatest pointer towards enlightenment. Because finally, by enlightenment, we are not looking at something which is isolated from our life, something which gives up what we call as pain or challenge in our life. But enlightenment is to understand why certain things happen in life and why life is given to us in a certain manner. So I think this is something which is very important to keep in mind, that the idea of enlightenment itself, it's not a binary position, nor it's it's a result of an alienated experience or alienation from what you are and then going to something which is beyond or up above, to describe it metaphorically. So I wish to give that introduction in the beginning, because some of the things perhaps which we are going to analyze are going to pinpoint some of the dark areas of human mind. And by looking at those dark areas, I think there's a lot of light which comes. So it is light not by ignoring the dark, but embracing the darkness along with us. And in that embrace, the darkness suddenly disappears and what you see is light. Well, I wanted to bring in these three personalities. Of course, there are many personalities in the Mahābhārata, as you would all know, very, very interesting characters. But I thought these three characters definitely are the epitome of certain values or certain dispositions which we want to focus on in a very precipitated manner, in a very concentrated manner. I want to bring in Arjuna at the very end, because I think we want to live with a smile. At least in this lecture, we want to, I meant to live this meeting with a smile. So if we discuss Duryodhana in the beginning, that may not happen. So I would bring in Krishna and Arjuna towards the end, and we'll start with Duryodhana. And if we have to talk about Duryodhana, you know that there is one character which we cannot miss. And I hope you know that, right? A son is non-existent without his father. So without Dhritarashtra, there is no story for Duryodhana. In fact, 60% of the story of Duryodhana is written by his father, Dhritarashtra. So let's go into a little bit more detail. So I will also take you a little bit into the text and to just give some references, but not to get lost into it, but only to perhaps refer certain textual portions of it, because which is also very interesting. Now, you all know that Mahābhārata starts with two synopses of the entire text. One is in a chronological order, you give a synopsis of the text. The second is a mini text, a slightly more smaller synopsis, and which is in fact articulated by none other than Dhritarashtra, the grand mighty king, and to whom is he narrating the entire Mahābhārata? He is narrating to the wise saintly person, Sanjaya. So Sanjaya has these big roles, as you know, in the Bhagavadgītā as well. So Dhritarashtra, in about 50 verses in the beginning of the Adi Parva, talks about what he saw in his life that happened to the family of Pandava and Vasudeva and all the other mighty kings. And he talks about all the glory which happened to others. Or he also talks about when mighty people took sides of the Pandavas. So this is the trajectory of his way of bringing in his perspective. So it is not just an objective narration of the Mahābhārata, but it is a narration of how he thought certain way incidents happened in Mahābhārata, certain way people sided other people was detrimental to his own life. So the recurring part of the verse is Tadha na ashamse vijayaya sanjaya. So what he says is that at that time I became hopeless, or my hopes all disappeared. And at that point I became hopeless. So this particular string of words, at that point I became hopeless, recurs for several verses. And what are these what are these incidents? Incidents are where when Pandavas gained a lot of wealth, or Krishna decided to side Arjuna. So as I said, it's a particular perspective of Dhritarashtra of how certain people sided other people and glory and wealth came to other people. Then he thought his life is hopeless, his life is gone. Why would someone say that, right? Why would someone say that there is no hope for his life by seeing certain incidents in others' life? So to him, another person's prosperity is his own peril. And this is very interesting because the whole Mahābhārata tries to also tell us this conflict between prosperity and peril, one person's prosperity and another person's peril. So it's as you know that many times the Mahābhārata, and particularly also the Gita, brings in this binary of polarity. And there are various polarities described, but one of this polarity, which is at least central when we learn a character like Dhritarashtra, is about prosperity and peril. So, so as I said, Dhritarashtra gives a description of how he lived with hopelessness by witnessing the various life episodes of his children, the powerful people, and finally the war when he has lost everything. And definitely at that point, it is definitely a point for hopelessness. So there are also various occasions where you see in the Mahābhārata that Dhritarashtra laments not knowing what to decide. And most of the time, this inability to make decision is weighed down by his own overwhelming attachment to Duryodhana. Now, before coming to Duryodhana, I also want to, it's a slight deviation, but because I want you to read that part of Adi Parva, because it's very interesting how the dynamics of thinking is brought in without using a linear structure, but a kind of a multi-modal structure, multi-modular structure. So once Dhritarashtra laments, and he talks about in 50 verses, you know, how his life is lost now, he has no hope in living because of so many things. Sanjaya advises him, or Sanjaya tries to console him. And the way Sanjaya consoles him is also very interesting. So Sanjaya advises, and this is reported, as you know, by Saudi in the Mahābhārata. Sanjaya consoles Dhritarashtra, and he tries to allay his grief to some extent. And Sanjaya explains to him the irony of life he narrates the triumphs of kings who achieved everything and at last had to succumb to the sway of time. So suddenly time is brought in as a big hero, and who is the player of destiny, who plays the game of destiny. I'll just read the English translation of some of those verses where Sanjaya advises Dhritarashtra. He says, who can avert by his cleverness the decrees of fate? None can go beyond the path marked for him by fate or providence. Then he says, existence and non-existence, pleasure and pain, they come by time. Time creates all things and time destroys them all. Time burns all creatures and time again extinguishes that fire. All things good and bad in the three worlds are created by time. Time destroys them and time creates them again. Time alone is awake when all is asleep. Time cannot be overcome by anyone. Time walks in everything without being retarded. Knowing that all things past, present, and future are the outcome of time, it is not fit for you to overcome with grief. So this is the advice given by Sanjaya to Dhritarashtra by bringing in or personifying time as the big decision maker. And why I bring in this is, on one side, we see that Mahābhārata is full of very interesting characters. But on another side, you see this character of fate, who is the faceless character. Fate doesn't have a face. Fate comes with using different forms of time and different forms of challenges. But this reference to time, reference to fate and destiny is again another continuing theme in Mahābhārata. So when you are not able to explain things in any logical manner or in any manner which it should have been, the resort is taken to fate and destiny. It doesn't mean that the fate or destiny resolves a challenge, but it is almost an acceptance or given. So at that point, Sanjaya tells Dhritarashtra, why don't you just give in? Because this is something over which you have no control. And as I just read out, the beautiful description of time and timelessness and existence and non-existence. So why I wanted to give you this interesting prelude to Dhritarashtra is also because the life of Duryodhana is incomplete without Dhritarashtra. He is a son born to a father, and Dhritarashtra is a father with a son who cannot be separated from him. So Duryodhana's life is in fact Dhritarashtra's life too. And I think there are very interesting references which Aidavati Karve also makes. Perhaps you should read Yugantha if you have not read it, and I'm sure most of you have read it. And so before talking about Duryodhana's pain, I wanted to talk about Dhritarashtra's pain, though I didn't put that in the title. I wanted to keep that as a surprise because Duryodhana's pain is actually coming from Dhritarashtra's pain. Or in a sense, you can say that Duryodhana continuously, if I use a very simplistic word, but it's a very simplistic word for the time being, Duryodhana continuously manipulates Dhritarashtra's weakness for his son, weakness for the love of his son. And Duryodhana knows this time and again, and he pulls Dhritarashtra's leg and making him blind by all means. So in a sense, Dhritarashtra is a blind king and a blind father because he just gives in for a son who cannot distinguish between what is good for him or what is guided by his own internal desires. But I want to come into that in a little more detail. So let's now go to Duryodhana because also the time is limited. So I'll rush a little bit, not rush, but may not go into too many details. Duryodhana, again, I think it's interesting, and I will refer to only some of the earlier parvams of Mahābhārata, and they themselves are very interesting if we have to talk about Duryodhana, and most of Duryodhana's personality comes through this, the earlier parvas. In Sabha Parvam, you know that there is a very interesting descriptions about Duryodhana's experience of having gone to the Maya's palace, of that magic palace, right? Where you mistake surface for water and water for surface. So you swim where you're not supposed to swim. You walk where you're supposed to swim. I don't want to go into the story of that because most of you know, if you are not, perhaps you should read the description of Maya's palace, which is built built for the Pandavas. So now what happens is Duryodhana, having witnessed this very excellent Maya's palace of Yudhishthira at the Rajasuya sacrifice, after that he is in great distress and despair. As I told you, two things. One is always connect Duryodhana with Dhritarashtra. You know, it's just the father and son have a lot of similar characteristics. So I think I told you that in the beginning itself, you see that Dhritarashtra's pain is because of someone else's prosperity. His peril, his sense of peril is connected with someone else's prosperity. So the same way, please read Duryodhana here. Duryodhana's pain is because someone is living in a very good palatial house, and that is not acceptable to him. Of course, he was humiliated there. That definitely is a part. But the pain is also because someone is living in prosperity. So the same hopelessness which Dhritarashtra experienced is also transferred to Duryodhana, his son, and he feels the same amount of displeasure and distress. And what happens is, after Duryodhana come back, he recounts the story to his uncle Shakuni, saying that what he experienced and what he went through. So I'll read a little bit of that again in English. You can go through the Sanskrit later. So Duryodhana tells Shakuni, and all that, what I'm going to say in quote unquote, when I saw all the blazing fortune at the Pandavas, I felt resentment and I am burning. And please underline this word burning, because that's again a very interesting word, which I will again come back. So he's burning, and again, quote unquote, though that is not my way, he says, I shall enter the fire or drink poison or drown myself, for I shall not be able to live. Duryodhana gives a lot of significance significance to his own life. Many times he makes such description. Again, I want to come back to that. So again, he says that he's unable to withstand the glory and prosperity he saw at the Maya's palace. And please remember the two words or two string of words which he uses. Again, please go back to the Sanskrit text later. One is the burning part. He burns. And the other is, I don't want to live. And because this is going to recur many a times in the other parvas, other incidents also, that he burns with jealousy and he doesn't want to live. And I'm going to tell you those stories as well in in short. But before going there, I also want to give you these counter arguments with his well-wishers and advisors. And actually, some of them are not his advisors, but at least they start with that, like advising, like Shakuni. Shakuni is never a proper advisor, but he also plays this double game of sometimes giving good advice. So after hearing this, Shakuni tells Duryodhana, see, you should not be jealous of Yudhishthira. The Pandavas are enjoying what they deserve as a result of their own good fortune. So again, what is to be focused here is the experience of jealousy. The Shakuni knows that what pains Duryodhana is the jealousy which comes from his experience of seeing someone doing good. And later, the story to narrate in brief, Duryodhana goes to Dhritarashtra. He threatens Dhritarashtra again that he will suicide. As I told you, there are many occasions where Duryodhana takes the tool of blackmailing, which is, I will die or I'm going to suicide if you don't do this. And you please see the trail of thought which continues by this threat to suicide. And he tells Dhritarashtra that he will suicide if something is not done to avenge the Pandava brothers, and if they are not invited for the dice game. And all through this description of Duryodhana, what you see is someone who is burning in jealousy. So if you are jealous, you burn. And that burning is actually an internal experience. And you know what happens in burning. This is not a burning for oneself. It's not burning of a candle, perhaps at the both ends. No, it's an internal burning which takes away your own essence, your own life juices. So Duryodhana is blind with his greed and his inability to withstand another person's prosperity. I want to continue with Duryodhana because there are some more interesting incidents. The other incident which I want to narrate to you is from Vanaparva. And some of you would have heard about the Ghoshayatra. The Ghoshayatra is described in Vanaparva. And the Ghoshayatra is, after the dice game is over, all the Pandava brothers, they are wailing in the forest, nothing to eat or pretty much nothing to eat, not all those royal clothes and attire, and Draupadi wearing bark clothes, which is again mentioned in text in the Mahābhārata, that how poorly adorned is Draupadi, was the princess, and how little these people have to eat. So they are really toiling. And then now who is the happy man at that time? Definitely the happy man is Duryodhana. So can't you just be happy and sit quiet there? No, he cannot. Because even when you are happy, remember what I said in the beginning, he is burning all the time. So when you are burning, quietude is not possible. When you are burning, you have to jump around because you have to diminish the heat inside, right? So the only way now Duryodhana thinks this can happen is, let me make a journey to that nearby village to inspect the cattle, whether they are doing good, how are the cattle, what else to be taken care of. But because this was a practice, right? Because of the society, the nature of the society and their business and economics, all that which was happening during that time. So he says, okay, this is the right time to go and check our cattle and how is this doing good. And this decision comes after he knows that the Pandavas are really struggling. So what does Duryodhana want? He wants to go there and he wants to just prick and poke, those beings who are there. So then he doesn't go alone. He goes with his entourage. And there is this beautiful description of the entourage of Duryodhana, who makes this Ghoshayatra. And I'll just very briefly say, so the entourage includes a lot of people with their wealth and their very good vehicles and ornaments and so on. And there are very interesting description about women, which I don't want to get into because that will be a very, very interesting description and a very different argument. So I wouldn't go into it because as you know that during those times, women also were considered as properties or they were given the price of an object. So women are also assembled along with them, wearing a very nice clothes, ornaments, etc., etc. So there are a lot of women also who are traveling in this Ghoshayatra. And this is again to poke Draupadi, who is wearing bark clothes there. And they make their travel. So it's a huge army of people. And I don't know what to compare this with, but imagine a huge, kind of a parade, which you see with all the wealth and pomp and all decorated in gold, horses, etc., etc., and the army men. And then they go and they reside very near where the Pandava brothers are residing. And so they are seeing what's happening to them, and the Pandava brothers also now know that these people have come. So then as Duryodhana and his people are marching forward, there is a place which he reaches called the Dvaitavana. The Dvaitavana, the forest of duality, very interesting words, very interesting names. Dvaitavana has a beautiful lake. So you know that even today, when you see a beautiful lake, you want to construct a big apartment complex there, right? So that's how we respected lake. But maybe all the people were not very different those days. Some of the people like Duryodhana, also thought, why not I construct a big apartment complex near this lake for the time being, and that I have these pleasure houses of living there with all this entourage of property, women, etc., accompanying me. So he sends his army to go into the Dvaitavana and to see, to make all these constructions possible. So once the army of Duryodhana goes into Dvaitavana, what happens is the Dvaitavana is inhabited by somebody else before this Duryodhana and their party came. And this is the island, or this is the place of a set of Gandharvas. And these Gandharvas have been staying there, or their property rights. They had the property rights even before Duryodhana inspected the property. So they really had the good deed and rights and all the legal things, you know. So they didn't allow the Duryodhana's party to come in and disturb it. So they said, no, we are already here. You cannot construct anything here. You have to go back. Well, as you know that Duryodhana and his people don't believe in going back once they decided something. So eventually a war happens, and it is a very severe, bloody war. And in that war, a lot of Duryodhana's army is defeated or killed. And Karna is beaten up. Of course, there are a couple of versions of this part, but let's not go into those different versions. The common version is that Karna is also beaten up, and Karna runs away from that place. And finally, what happens is Duryodhana is made a captive by the Gandharva king, and he is taken with him. Now, this news has reached the Pandavas, and some of the Kaurava messengers go to the Pandava brothers, and you do something, because I heard that Chitraratha is your friend, Arjuna's friend. So can you just talk to them and get Duryodhana released? To make the story very brief, Arjuna and Bhima goes. We don't know whether it is by fight or by pacifying. At any case, Duryodhana is released. So Duryodhana is no more a captive of the Gandharva community, and he is back. Now, now this is where you have to focus. So what happens is, when he comes back, no, before he comes back, there is another very interesting text which I want to read. So before releasing, or once Duryodhana is released, before he leaves back to where he was residing in the village, Yudhishthira tells Duryodhana, and this is the way, and with a lot of affection, he says this: "Oh child, don't do a rash act again like this. A very impulsive fight will never bring happiness. You be pleased with what you have and all your brothers, and go back to your capital, and without yielding yourself to despondency or tearlessness." So the advice given by Yudhishthira there to Duryodhana is, see, don't be so childish, and don't be impulsive, and don't feel so bad. And that it's a double reading should be there in that sense. Don't feel bad. Why? Don't feel bad that you were made captive by the Gandharva, and don't feel bad that I had to come to release you from his captivity. Because Duryodhana, when he gets back and he again sees Karna, who meets again him, he's very much he's very depressed. I mean, if at all I use that word, and he is overwhelmed with shame, and he feels his life is over. And again, what happens is, I wouldn't go into the detail, but there's a very, very interesting. He says, if he goes back, this is his narration to Karna and a few others. He says, now if I go back to Hastinapura, it will be terrible. Because how will I look at my parents? What will I tell my people? That I was made a captive and the Pandava brothers had to liberate me? Okay, so now I don't want to go back. What I want to do is prayopapesha. I don't know whether you have heard this word. Prayopapesham is a volunteer sacrificing of one's life over a period of time. And so Duryodhana says, no, I want to give up my life. So remember, in the beginning also I said that Duryodhana time and again brings this threat, I'm going to take my life. So he uses that threat to his father, to his friends, people who care for him. Of course, at this junction also, he goes on with this description because they're very interesting description of Duryodhana's threat to do prayopapesha. He says, I do not want any dharma, artha, and kama or power, and I don't even want any luxury of life. I'm firmly decided that I want to end my life in prayopapesha. Now, of course, Duryodhana is dissuaded from that and thinks he goes back. But what is interesting again in this story is Duryodhana's mind, who goes back to life and death with so much easiness. On one side, he wants to live his life by taking away the prosperity and splendor of other people. Immediately, he also wants to take his own life by seeing that his life has been reduced by shame or some other manner by the Pandava brothers. So you can see that the flimsy characteristic which Duryodhana gives to this most fundamental reality of life, which is life and death. For Duryodhana, life and death are two little games with which he can play around his father, his advisors, his kith and kin. So there are again very interesting ideas which you can see about Duryodhana. There's one more small reference to Duryodhana's threat to life, which I'll very briefly say. This is later again in the Udyoga Parva, when Dhritarashtra, after all this life of exile for the Pandavas is over, Dhritarashtra pleads to Duryodhana, give them some land and forget about it. Let them live in that corner. But then Duryodhana says, Tyaktam me jivitam, rajyam dhanam sarvam. Again, please remember the first part. Tyaktam me jividam. I will give up my life, but I won't give the earth to the Pandavas, even for a needle to point. And this is a very famous reference many of us would know. What again, why I wanted to bring in this little part is that, again, Duryodhana's reference to life, or is he pretends as if he has no attachment to life, so he can embrace death very easily. But his embrace of death is not actual embrace of death. It is not the embrace of death of a wise man, but Duryodhana's threat to embrace death is not coming from his wisdom. It's coming from what I was referring in the beginning, is burning inside, burning with jealousy. So please remember that there is a difference in Duryodhana's need to give up his life. So I will stop with Duryodhana there, because otherwise we have to spend perhaps a whole day, and you know that Mahābhārata is a huge, large book. So let me get back to a little bit more analysis there, and then I will get to Arjuna. Mahābhārata talks about a lot of dense psychological dispositions. And to simply put, some of these are anger, greed, and false pride, durabhimana. That also comes in. And Duryodhana is one of those a very important character, you can say, who is portrayed as someone's extreme greed leading to a jealousy which blinds him, and burns him from inside. And from that burning, continuously putting him in a bottomless pain and sorrow and hopelessness. Now, there are also very interesting characteristics if you look at Yudhishthira. I mean, just because that I didn't talk about Yudhishthira doesn't mean that he is a cool character, all nice and good. No, Yudhishthira is too complex, that his complexity is covered up by the dharma idea of Yudhishthira, which I don't want to talk about now. But what I want to briefly perhaps say is that there are two tendencies which you see between Duryodhana and Yudhishthira. These two tendencies are tendencies for pleasure that give way to self-destruction. And you see that is why Yudhishthira gave in for playing the dice game not once, twice, because everything was over. He pledged everything, he lost everything, and he went away. He could have entered everything. At least that calamity would not have been that bad. But then the scheme which he gained back here, Dhritarashtra and Duryodhana was playing, which is to call back them again and say that now why don't you play again? And now if you fail, you know the rest, right? The 12 years of forest life and 13 years of anonymity. But then anyone who would have been interested in the welfare of that community or the family of yours would not have taken that bid, right? But you know that Yudhishthira takes that bid. So again, of course, he brings in these arguments of dharma, etc., there also. But what I wanted to point out is that both Yudhishthira, both Duryodhana and Yudhishthira have that Yudhishthira, of course, is very grossly present, is grossly indicative of his desire, of his greed for pleasure. But Yudhishthira also has the need for pleasure and also self-destruction. So this is again two very complex ideas which comes in when you compare these two characters. And both in a sense want to self-preserve, and knowingly or unknowingly, they also want to destruct their life. Both go towards a vicarious attraction for suffering. Both suffers. Duryodhana doesn't say that he is suffering. His suffering is, of course, when he sees another person enjoying. And Dharmaputra's Yudhishthira's suffering is by his continuous critique and engagement with what is right. And as you know that it is the whole idea of righteousness which takes him, even at the end of the Mahaprasthana time, when everything is over, even at that time, he is literally pulled back by this whole complex idea of righteousness which he carries. So these are very interesting ideas which we need to discuss more. Now, in all through the stories of Dhritarashtra, Yudhishthira, and Duryodhana, you also see a lot of foolish decisions are taken, and they are covered by bringing the role of fate with the anthropomorphic face, as I was discussing with you in the beginning. So, so Dhritarashtra has this excessive attachment to his son, and he also has a desire to protect his state. Of course, we are not denying that. But then he's torn between the two. And but though he's torn between the two, the tearing apart is not equal to both sides, as you know, because he given for what he calls as he cannot stand the suffering of his son, Duryodhana. But as I already told you, he's burning inside. So when someone burns, definitely the smoke and heat will be around, and that will be disturbing the other person too. So I will perhaps stop here with Duryodhana and Dhritarashtra. I know that I wanted to say much, but I couldn't complete. But I want to now go back to, bring back Arjuna. And some of the very interesting incidents of Arjuna. I don't want to give a life history of Arjuna, But as you would all know, Arjuna is, he is not someone of that ordinary kind. He's almost like a polymath, right? I mean, he can speak many languages. He is a genius. When you put him in a difficult situation, he will come out of it. In fact, he will make the best out of it. Most of the life incidents of Arjuna says that you give him a difficulty, he will come up with an opportunity and something new. It's a very innovative kind of person, transforming difficulty to opportunity and goodness for everything. And he's also a people's person. Wherever he goes, there's a few people surrounding him. Community likes him. And he's one of this charming person, as you know. So his life is in a sense very successful, though of course he has challenges. And so a very successful person, and you also know that he plays around with everything. He's a very good experimentalist. He can experiment with everything. He puts his own life into experiment. I don't want to go into the details, but you would see that why I'm saying this. I mean, he can play with everything, and he can still be a very fun person. Now, as I said, I don't want to go into the life history of Arjuna because that will take a very long time. But in short, he's a very interesting character, very successful guy, very lucky person, as what someone would describe, and very valorous and loved by people, loved by everybody. So, and he's also a lot of balanced person. He is a lot of balances there in him. And it's not that these brothers, the Pandava brothers, want to straight away go for fight and the war, but it was the fate, as I said, the destiny with that anthropomorphic phase, which came in and forced them to a war. And so when you look at the Gita, it's very interesting. In the beginning itself, you would see that there's a description of how the armies are displayed, right? I'm now referring to the Gita, the Bhagavadgītā. So Dharma Kshetre, Kurukshetre starts. So how are the armies arranged, or what is their deployment of the army? How are they deployed? In fact, there are 2-3 characters who ask how are the army deployed, and Dhritarashtra also asks how was the army deployed, and Arjuna also asks how is my army deployed, and this itself is very interesting. Now, when Arjuna looks at the 2 armies, the people he sees, the deployed army he sees, are fathers, grandfathers, teachers, uncles, brothers, sons, grandsons, fathers-in-law, and friends. And interestingly, perhaps inspired by his father again, what Duryodhana sees is, when he looks around in the battlefield, and the 2 parties are Mahāradhis everywhere. Sarva eva Mahāratha, he says. And who are these Mahārathas? The mighty kings or the mighty emperors. They are Bhishma, Drona, Karna, Kripa, Ashwatthama, Vikarna, Jayadratha, and so on. And so they are all mighty warriors on his side. For him, they are the people who are going to ready to give up their life in order to save Duryodhana or fulfill his desires. So what I wanted to indicate here is that very important description. What you say is Mamaka Pandavaschaiva. So my people and those Pandavas people. So for Duryodhana, all these people are, pieces on the chessboard who will play around and give up their life to fulfill his desires. But for Arjuna, it was different. Arjuna didn't see the warriors and emperors. You should have been seeing the warriors and emperors if you are in the battlefield. But interestingly, Arjuna, he doesn't see. It's not that he lost his sight. He's an extremely intelligent person. He knows what to see at the right situation. Even what you see in an outward manner is different. He knows what is to be seen. But at this point, he doesn't see any of that. What he sees is his kith and kin. And you know that what happens is very, very interesting. I mean, if I can go a little bit on that. So after seeing that it is his kith and kin who is in front of him, and these are the people whom he has to fight with, that is something which Arjuna couldn't take at all. And there are very interesting descriptions. And these descriptions are his defenses. As you know that you would see that in the first and second chapter, there's a lot of description. And that there's a description of defenses in the second chapter as well. And these defenses are of ethical defense, of ethics. Ethics is brought in. Of course, Dr. Gitesh talked about that this series is focusing on ethics. But God help us, because ethics itself is too complex and it depends upon how you make the narrative of ethics. So Arjuna weaves very strong arguments about ethics, that if I fight the war, I will be doing an unethical act. But then why are you here at the beginning? You are here in the battlefield because you decided. Or why are you now in this state? That question doesn't come for him, because to him, as of now, what he sees is kith and kin and his people whom he has to fight. And so he also gives other defenses, like defenses on how his personal values will be degraded and how social values will be degraded, how family values will be degraded. And he also says, okay, let me say that, okay, I forget all these ethical issues and I will be unethical and I will fight this war and I might win. Then he says, then what happens? What will happen to me? What is my future? What will be my purpose in life after that? What are my life goals? So he also shows a sense of lack of goal perception at that point. There's no future for Arjuna at that point. So interestingly, you see Arjuna also hopeless here. Remember, I started our discussion with the hopelessness which was shared by Dhritarashtra to Sanjaya. Here, Arjuna is sharing his hopelessness to none other than Vasudeva Krishna. And again, I don't want to go into it now, but there are very interesting description of Krishna in the beginning. I think maybe in the Sabha Parva. At some point, one of these wise men thinks that it is Krishna who can advise them on the Rajasuya. And why do they think that Krishna can advise him on the Rajasuya? Because Krishna, everybody knows that he is an indifferent man. He's beyond desires and anger. And these are the descriptions given there. And he has this sense of indifference. Though he is always smiling and all that, he has a lot of indifference in him. So maybe he is the right person. So here, Arjuna falls at the feet of Krishna, who is again an epitome of indifference. Maybe here indifference, I'm using the word perhaps not in any negative connotation. Indifference in a sense of either knowing that everything has to happen has already happened, which you know is the second chapter, or there is no point in wailing when you come at the critical stage of your life situation and fate is looking at you. You know that in Bhagavadgītā, there are various junctures where it is said, all that which has to happen has already happened, or that which has to happen will happen. So interestingly, fate also continues to play his or her, because I mean, fate looks like a his rather than a her. So I'm giving a more masculine gender to fate at this point. So fate will play his role there. But what Krishna does is, and remember when Dhritarashtra claims his hopelessness, Sanjaya talks about how other kings also have lived their life and they also had to go through their life journeys, ironies, etc. But what was Krishna's response after hearing all these defenses, various kinds of defenses, brilliant defenses? you cannot argue with Arjuna. You bring in a lot of deontological arguments and move away from the utilitarian mindset one would mistake, which Arjuna might have. So he brings in all very, very complex arguments of dealing with ethics and life purpose. But then, and as you know, like Duryodhana, he also says at the end, I rather die. So interestingly, what I again want to bring in is this: death is taken as a source of succor, as a source of succor and relief, time and again in Mahābhārata. Various people do this, but of course, why they do it, how they do it, and what is the situation in which they do it is very, very interesting. So Arjuna says, okay, if none of this is going to work, I'm going to die. And or I'm going to give up my life, not by fighting the war, but perhaps by running away. Because for a Kshatriya, to run away from the battle is equivalent to, or worse than, giving up your life. And as you know, the famous Arjuna, after having all these defenses, he falls flat, right? He falls flat, throwing away his weaponry and so on and so forth. And how does Krishna start? Krishna starts with Ma Shuja. What he says is sorrow is not a timely thing to happen now. There's no need of grieving. And he's almost like admonishing a child, saying, just don't cry, just don't cry. But then beyond that admonishing to a child, Krishna continues this teaching of don't cry, or don't just grieve till the very end. Because even towards the end of the Bhagavad-Gītā, you see that Krishna, what he wants to convey is that there's no point in grieving. So I don't want to go into the detail because I've already taken 15 minutes more than what is allotted to me. But you would see that the Krishna's message is the message of a sense of objectivity, which can be misinterpreted as indifference, and which can be rightly interpreted as hopelessness having no place in life, or as grief having no place in life, to put it in a negative manner. And how does he put it in a constructive manner? He constructively puts it is to look at life with a cheer. And it is not that by being cheerful, your challenges will go away. In fact, by being cheerful, more challenges will come to you. Because why? Because you will see the challenges more, because now you have a clarity. Now your objectivity is back. So you see this varied versions of hopelessness and giving up in the Mahābhārata. And why Bhagavad-Gītā is very important is that the Gita also plays around with the binaries. The whole of Mahābhārata is the play with the binary. And Bhagavad-Gītā also play with the binary. But then the Gita gives you a different perspective beyond the binary, by not just dissolving the binaries, but embracing the binary in a certain sense of integral consciousness. And to use that word for the first time in this lecture, and also marking a reference to the series, that consciousness is brought in as something which gives you enlightenment by seeing the irony in its total perspective. So consciousness is not seen as just a cognitive performance or a cognitive act of supreme intelligence. No, consciousness is seen as a mark of enlightenment when you are able to see the ironies, when you are able to clearly see the ironies, when you are able to accept it, and at the same time live with it by perhaps looking at the possibility of a different self for you. I don't have time to go into, but you also know that the Gita time and again discusses about the different possibilities of looking at your own self. What is the true nature of yourself? Because that is a very, very important discussion in the Gita. What are you? What is your identity? Is your identity a mere political identity or a psychological identity, as Arjuna feels in the beginning, or is it something else? So this is a long discussion which Krishna does in the Bhagavad-Gītā, but I wouldn't go into it. So what I want to perhaps conclude here is that when we look at the idea of enlightenment, in the Mahābhārata or in the Bhagavadgītā, it's very important to keep these very interesting characters of the Mahābhārata, their sense of hopelessness not varying in decrease, but varying in kind, and their sense of hopefulness also varying in kind. And finally, perhaps acceptance of ironies or acceptance of the binaries as the sure way, perhaps, to go beyond the binaries, and not by dissolving them, but by embracing them. So enlightenment as an act of consciousness through integration of the ironies and inclusion of the ironies into a larger personal self, or I should not say that, not to a larger personal self, to a larger collective self, to which your personal self has transformed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Bala. Thank you, Professor Menon. I would like to restate what Professor Bala just said, that Professor Menon has given newer insights for research topics for scholars interested in the study of Mahābhārata. And I think we need to well take care of what the point that she mentioned, that let's read the text and look at it from various dimensions, which actually have come out through the questions also. Professor Sangeetha actually started with the words of Iravati Karve, and that reminded me of my first encounter with Mahābhārata as an academic text. And I would like to say that Yugant was my first book that I read on Mahābhārata before I decided to do PhD based upon this epic. She's today drawn our attention to binaries in Mahābhārata, which is a very important point for all of us to take note of, with focus on binary of prosperity and peril, explicating the intense tussle in the mind of Duryodhana due to this binary. She even brought to light the uniquely innovative personality of Arjuna, explicating to all of us is how he knew the art of altering the difficulties into opportunities, while giving him an honorable title of an experimentalist. I think we need to imbibe some qualities of Arjuna in us, because we live in the time of difficulties, and how we can actually change these times of difficulties into opportunities is what I think COVID is also teaching us. And in our own little ways, I think Professor Bala agrees to it. We've tried to do the same thing through our series of webinars, through the support of all the scholars who have joined us in the last 31 weeks. So Professor Menon has been weaving around hopelessness as is portrayed in the characters of Dhritarashtra, Duryodhana, and Arjuna. And in a very positive way, she brought in Krishna as a symbolic figure of cheerfulness, while concluding that how Bhagavad-Gītā goes beyond the binaries through the act of enlightened consciousness. Professor Menon, it was just so well worded, well academically rooted address of yours. And as Professor Bala said, giving a completely new dimension to our series of webinars, bringing in the very spirit of consciousness. And as we've been harping on, the yogic consciousness in Bhagavad-Gītā and Mahābhārata. Thank you for being with us on behalf of the Department of Philosophy, University of Delhi, Kamala Nehru College, Professor Bala, myself, as well as our younger scholars. I thank you for sparing time. I thank you even on behalf of our participants who are very regular in all the series of this ongoing webinars.